Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Padmanabhan. Thank you for joining. Appreciate your time. I think brief some thoughts which I would like to share here before a formal introduction. I know Dr. Padmanabhan since the time he joined Masters in KGMC, and still I remember the meeting in the old clinic where we were practicing at that time many years back. So, and since then, I think definitely he's a one known name in pediatric dentistry to reckon, and definitely he's a fantastic clinician. Also, parallelly, he has done certain amount of good number of publications. If you some of the papers which I could recollect are on natal neonatal teeth and all, as well as on sedation. I remember him doing this as a dissertation during his masters, and also to break the jinx in KGMC Lucknow to join an IAPD conference and international meetings and conferences. I think probably some of the smaller moments I could just recollect as I'm seeing Dr. Padmanabhan. So definitely, and a big contributor in the Pedo Buddies group for the knowledge source, and this is probably we have crossed 1 year with the Chat with Champion Buddy series, and I think we have pretty good amount of knowledge is being shared here. And so thank you very much, Dr. Padmanabhan, for sparing your time. I appreciate that. And I'll hand out to Dr. Vignesh to do a formal introduction and start the meeting.
So, thank you for your kind words, sir. And so before, good afternoon to all. Welcome to all for the Chat with Champion Buddies lecture series 27. So before going to the program, I just want to read the guidelines which has to be followed the next 45 minutes to 1 hour. So please dedicate this 45 minutes of committed time for each lecture session. Sit in a quiet place and avoid public environments, external distractions and interruptions. And put your phone on silent mode and switch off the camera and Google Meet to avoid distractions. Discuss with your other colleagues and update yourself in case you have missed out on a session. Take notes during the session. Please email us all the queries which will be answered before the next session. So no in-between discussion session will take place. Kindly fill the feedback form at the end of the session, which will be posted in the chat box, and claim for certificate of attendance. So now it's time for today's session. So I had posted already the invitations earlier yesterday's and in the Pedo Buddies group and all other social medias regarding the today's lecture. To be on the sedation checklist, how to get things right. So we all know as a practitioner, personally I know today's program abstract also the first line I just want to say the two types of errors we commonly make, the errors of ignorance and errors of ineptitude. The errors of ignorance is because we don't know enough, and errors of ineptitude is because we fail to make proper use of what we know. So similar to it, the many failures which has been happening in sedation dentistry due to later than the former. And since today's lecture will attempt to simplify the process of planning sedation session and when designed a checklist which can improve the outcomes. And we all know today's speaker. I'm very happy to share that I invite our speaker, Dr. Padmanabhan sir, with a short CV. So Dr. Padmanabhan sir has graduated from King George Medical University, Lucknow, and he secured the Sam Harris bursary from IAPD in the year 2009. And he has many PubMed Index publications, and he's a contributor and section editor for the chapter on sedation, general anesthesia, and Elsewhere's textbook Pediatric Dentistry Principles and Practice by Dr. Muthu sir and Shivakumar sir. And he has given many guest lectures in national conferences. Currently, he's serving as a reader in the RBS Dental College, Coimbatore. He's a director of Dental Academy, through which he conducts CD programs and NEET MBS training program for budding dentists. And his area of research has been recognized into sedation in pediatric dentistry and bonding and adhesive dentistry in young permanent dentition. So, on behalf of the team of Chat with Champion Buddies, we welcome you for the welcome once again for the program of Chat with Champion Buddies program, sir. Over to you, sir. You can screen share and get started.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Vignesh, for those kind words. Thank you very much, Muthu sir, for those wonderful memories. I've always gained through the association that I've had with you. Thank you so very much for all those years where you've been a wonderful mentor for me. And whatever I am in pediatric dentistry, it has a major role. You have a very, very major role in shaping me as a good pediatric dentist. Thank you for the same. So today,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm muting myself, sir. In case of any issues, any audio issues or any screening issues, I'll just unmute and inform you, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Is my screen visible, Dr. Vignesh?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the lovely introduction once again, Dr. Vignesh. In fact, you made my first slide very, very easy. Few months back, when I took a break from social media, I was actually going through a lot of these articles, one of which is actually there on the screen for you. It is a psychological perspective of why medical professionals fail. Okay, so it was, I mean, a wonderful paper. When you get some time, when you get time, you must actually go through this. This is a paper which was written in 1975 by Gorowitz and McIntyre. It's called Toward a Theory of Medical Fallibility. And in this paper, they introduced two main reasons why medical professionals tend to fail. The failure could probably be because of ignorance. Ignorance, as it was stated in the abstract, is because of things that we do not know. And but they found that even as early as 1975 itself, one of the major reasons why failures happen is because of ineptitude. Okay, and that's a wonderful term. It was actually a new term for me when I read this paper. And ineptitude, they say, is not being able to utilize what you know. Okay, and when I read this wonderful book by Atul Gawande, I'm sure a lot of you would have read this. It's called the Checklist Manifesto. If you get time, you should definitely go through this. I especially I love this wonderful quote. All right, the volume and complexity of what we know has exceeded our ability to deliver its benefits. What a powerful statement. We know so much. All right, so much that we sometimes we do not have the ability to deliver the benefits of what we know itself. Okay, and Dr. Atul Gawande very clearly says that's exactly the reason why you need a checklist. Okay, and today's lecture is also about the same. Now, I'm sure all of you here would have taken flight journeys, and if you ever had a chance to listen to the first officer and the pilot speaking inside the cockpit, yeah, they would always say these things, right? Trim tabs set, cowl flaps open, oil coolers set. So, see, all these people have put thousands and thousands of hours in manning flights, actually. But still, during every single flight, all right, in spite of their experience, they ensure that, they go through these checklists. So wherever lives are involved, okay, a checklist ensures that the work is done properly. We may not be probably controlling many lives together like probably these pilots, but one life at a time, when we are influencing the quality of life, one life at a time, I believe checklists play a very, very important role. And that is the gist or the reason why I thought, I'll talk about the important things, that may be necessary to get things right while planning a sedation session. So I welcome you all to this talk. Thank you very much for being, present for this talk. So this talk is about the different types of checklists and what exactly they help us in achieving. Okay. To start with, you can scan this QR code, or you can just simply type this, this link here, bit.ly/sedation checklists. It will lead you to a Google Drive folder where almost all these checklists, sedation records, forms, everything that I'm going to talk about today is all stored there in that particular folder, which is actually free to download. And I would like to say that none of these, checklists or records are my personal own. I've not created these checklists. These are some things that I've actually downloaded over a period of time, and from where even I've learned a lot of things. So with this, let us actually get into the actual checklist. So if you are planning a sedation session, you may require many things that you may have to take care of. You may require multiple checklists, and they can be divided as selection and assessment checklists, equipment checklists, the documentation checklists, and the intraoperative, the pre-intraoperative and post-operative checklists, and the checklists that have to be followed during discharge and recall. Okay, so once again, scanning that QR code or following that link will give you, the precise location of all the checklists that we are going to discuss today. All right. So this sedation record, which is based on the AAPD's sedation record for all types of sedation, it begins with, of course, noting down the important things to the basic identification things to begin with, like the patient name, sex, and of course weight and height. And we are going to see why calculation of BMI plays a very, very important role, especially when you're going to plan deeper levels of sedation. The most important thing that we always need to ask before we plan any procedure is the why. Now, if you decide to sedate a child, if you decide to deliver dental treatment under sedation for a pediatric patient, the first question you need to ask is why? Why do I need to sedate this child? And most of the time, I would say 99% of the times, the reason why you wish to sedate this child would fall within these 4 categories that are listed there. Either the child is fearful, anxious, or the patient does not have cooperative ability because of emotional maturity or lack of disability, or it's such a young child that who's developing psych you want to protect, or it's probably because of some medical risks. So most of the times you will notice that the reason why we need to deliver treatment under sedation would fall within these 4 chief indications. Okay. Now, why is this very essential? Now, for example, now if you see this patient, I'm hoping that the video is visible. Actually, I can hear the sound, whether you are able to hear the sound of the video. So this is a child who's communicating well. He communicates very perfectly, but is fearful and anxious. Okay? So in such a child, whatever sedation will actually work. So the moment you decide on the indication for sedation, it also opens the door. In this child, a simple minimal. This child is a perfect candidate for noise. The moment you give some basic behavior guidance, the child would be a fantastic candidate for nitrous oxide sedation, or the child would be a fantastic candidate for minimal sedation. Whereas if you look at the next one, this particular patient, right? This patient was very violent. All right, his parents had great difficulty trying to hold him, and of course he had he was a child with special needs, and he was an adolescent with special needs, and he could not his level of comprehension was very less. So in such a child, a minimal or a moderate level of sedation alone may not be of great benefit. Okay, so you probably would require a deeper level of sedation. So just by looking at these 4 points, just by trying to fit the patient into either of these 4 indications, it actually will even help you to decide on the type of sedation that you require during the dental procedure. So that is the essence of asking why. And sometimes when you see a child is because you're selecting a patient because of some kind of a syndrome, some kind of a mental disability, or some kind of condition that is resulting in low level of IQ. And the most common condition, one of the most common condition that we come across is Down syndrome. All right. Now, one thing you'll have to understand is that as soon as you see a Down syndrome child and you feel that externally the child is appearing fine, do not rush the child into sedation. All right. Especially syndromic patients, you will have to look at those features of their syndrome which would make sedation difficult. Like, for example, I was able to read this recent paper by Nakazawa, actually, wherein they talked about how many Down syndrome children are having, lingual tonsillar hypertrophy. And having such a lingual tonsillar hypertrophy can predispose these children to, a great risk during sedation, because it might be difficult to resuscitate, and it might be very, very difficult to manage any kind of emergencies in these patients. And if you look at, the pulmonary airway findings, we may just see, like we've probably read through all these things about Down syndrome features, like the patient has microcephaly, macroglossia, and all that. But when you actually try to sedate a child with Down syndrome, when you try to take them to a deeper levels of sedation, all these features play a very major role. Having a bigger tongue, whether it's Down syndrome or another syndrome, which is called the Wiedemann syndrome, Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, all these syndromes will make resuscitation very difficult. Actually, a macroglossia or a microcephaly, a narrow palate, all these things can aggravate the problems related to resuscitation. So going back to the reason why, all right. So the moment you decide why you're trying to sedate this child, the moment you answer this question itself, two things open: whether the candidate is a good candidate for sedation itself, or if at all, if the candidate is a good candidate for sedation, what would be the level of sedation expected? Will the patient, will a minimal or moderate sedation itself would suffice, or will the patient require a deeper sedation or GA? So that's the first important reason why, the first important point, the indication for sedation is very, very important in a checklist. Now, after having gone through this, the next thing that you're going to ask is you're going to do a review of systems, okay? Now, medical history and review of symptoms is of utmost importance, especially when you're, planning for a deeper level of sedation, moderate or deep level of sedation, anything other than noise. Ask about allergies, any previous adverse reactions. And if you go through all these points, you would come across a very important step, which is asking whether the patient is a mouth breather. Okay. Now, obstructive sleep apnea, especially in children, is growing as, as a silent pandemic. Okay, now it is getting, we are increasingly started to notice children who may show signs of disordered breathing, of sleep disordered breathing. So it is always necessary that the moment you know whether the child, the moment you find out that the child has the habit of snoring, or the child snores during the night, the child has a habit of mouth breathing, the lips are not competent at rest, and there is a lip apart posture that the child frequently maintains, immediately try to use these ASA guidelines to check whether the patient could be a potential candidate of OSA or not. Now, again, these guidelines are also there on the checklist folder that I've actually uploaded, so you can actually go through that. So either of these, if any two out of these three categories are present, like presence of some physical characteristics, or presence of findings that reveal the presence of airway obstruction or somnolence, and history of somnolence would help you in coming to a conclusion whether the candidate can be a potential OSA patient or not. And if it is an OSA patient, feel free, you will have to communicate this information to your anesthetist first, and then let him decide whether how you are planning to go ahead with the treatment of this child. And if you're especially here in South India, all right, and now you may all think, why should I ask about birth and family history when I'm planning to do a sedation? Now, if you're especially located in Tamil Nadu or South India, you will come across a major sector, a sect of people who are called Chettiars. Okay, they are predominantly Telugu-speaking people. There are a lot of Chettiars. There are different subsects. In fact, I believe there are 20 plus subsects of sects of Chettiars that are there in Tamil Nadu. And being predominantly in the business community, they are actually there all over the world. Now, if ever you come across a person, all right, who says whose name ends with Setti, Chetty, Chettiar, or Gupta, very careful with Gupta. If it's a Gupta of South Indian origin, definitely you'll have to ask this question. Now, why am I asking you to inquire about caste? All right, because a particular section of Chettiars who are called Arya Vaishya Chettiars, all right, who are very, very, who are present in significant numbers, especially in the place where I practice, Coimbatore, they lack a type of cholinesterase that is necessary for metabolizing succinylcholine. And there have been reports of many deaths of patients not being able to, not being, wherein the anesthetists couldn't revive them after a procedure under anesthesia. Why? Because the succinylcholine that was used as a muscle relaxant wouldn't get metabolized, and it would have resulted in the patient entering into a permanent state of muscle relaxation and subsequent death. So asking for family history or social history and previous history of sedation or general anesthetics can actually be very, very relevant, and this is exactly one of the reasons why it is important. Okay, now the next crucial part of the checklist is, before when you're trying to select your candidate, is to check for the airway related disorders. I'm sure a lot of people, champions who have talked in these sessions prior have talked a great deal about obstructive sleep apnea and all the other things. So a very quick look into what you need to check for. Check for the neck mobility. Check whether there is, the patient is having a severe class 2 by any chance, and is there a very, very narrow maxilla, about the mouth opening, and we already talked about the potential of the influence of macroglossia. So a simple assessment that can actually help you is, if the child is cooperative, just try to ask the child to protrude the tongue forward, put the tongue out, and just check for how the tonsils are. Now the moment you see that the tonsils are kissing tonsils, or if the tonsils are really big, convey this information to your anesthetist, and and then decide on how you wish to proceed with sedation. Another important, of course, classification that can actually help you is the Mallampati classification. Again, asking the patient to put the tongue forward and see what you can see actually. Whether you're able to see the pharyngeal wall, or if you're able to see only the hard palate, which is the extreme. So this modified Mallampati score also would help you when deciding. So this is a table that is there in our textbook of pediatric dentistry by Dr. Muthu sir and Shivakumar sir. This table will definitely be there in the the third edition that is coming up. So based on these parameters, you can decide whether the patient is going to have a favorable airway or an unfavorable airway. Now, this can help you in turn to decide whether the candidate is a good candidate, right candidate, or whether the better, or is this a person a very bad candidate for in-office sedation. Okay, and so summarizing whatever we just saw right now. All right. So the patient selection criteria, or the patient selection checklists, by the time you finish this checklists, all right, you will know for sure what type of sedation will work in this patient. You will know for sure, is this patient a high risk, is in the high risk category for, adverse events during deeper levels of sedation? Should we actually sedate this child in office, or is it better to do a hospital-based care, sedation or GA for this patient? All these questions can get very simply answered by following this checklist. Sometimes when we just miss these checklists and, just like that post patients, that's when mishaps happen with the sedation, especially moderate and deep sedation. That's exactly when mishaps occur. But when you do a thorough vetting of, all these features and points, you can definitely reduce the chances of mishaps. All right. The next moment, if you look at the last line, is whether you decide that a patient is a good candidate for in-office sedation. The next thing that you would start talking to the parent is about obtaining informed consent. Now, again, if you scan this QR code, you will get different types of consent forms that you can use for different types of sedation. Like there's a consent form for oral sedation, for noise, for intravenous sedation. So you can actually discuss. You can actually download these and go through it, and you can even write back to me if you have any doubts related to the same. And this is the best time to review not just the preoperative instructions, also the postoperative instructions. Remember this point one very, very well. Postoperative precautions or postoperative instructions are not to be given only postoperatively. You will have to even tell it preoperatively. You're going to understand why that is when you see more checklists as we go further. So I'm sure you're all in line with me, and I hope that I'm making sense. All right. So if you're feeling that this lecture is not giving you some important tips about the type of drug that you can use or the technique that you can use, please do bear up with me. This topic is more about how to plan a sedation session without any failure. And of course, you'll find more details regarding patient selection and assessment in our newer edition. This is the old edition, second edition. We are eagerly waiting for the third edition, and you'll be able to find greater details in that. All right. So once you've decided the patient and you've selected the patient, the next type of things that you will have to ensure is functioning properly is can be done with the help of equipment checklists. Okay. Now we all know that nitrous oxide is becoming the most commonly used sedation technique. It greatly provides minimal sedation, and in some instances you use it for even moderate sedation. But there is a checklist that has to be followed even with noise. Now this is from the ADA checklist for nitrous oxide equipment. It's again there in my folder that I've shared with you. Okay, so check for all these points in your machine. Okay. Now, whether the lines, if you're having a centralized system, especially in centralized system, you will have to check at least once in a month whether there is mixing of gases especially when the lines are going through walls, where it is cutting through walls and entering inside? Is there any abnormal mixing of gases? During maintenance check, did anybody remove the DISS, the diameter index safety system tubes, and refit it wrong? So these are all the important points that you have to check if you have a centralized system, gas supply system. Now, if you have a localized system, you will have to check for the pin index safety system to ensure that the nitrous oxide cylinder fits into nitrous oxide, the oxygen cylinder fits into the oxygen part, okay? And check whether all the alarms are working. I'm going to show you all these things, how you go ahead. Now, this is from the catalog of one of the major nitrous oxide machine makers, Porter. Now, if you look at the different the brochure, the information brochure itself, they very, very clearly say about what all things you need to check before each use, what needs to be checked monthly, and what needs to be checked at more frequent intervals. Now, for example, the nitrous oxide fail-safe system is something that you have to check before each use, all right? So how do you check it? I mean, this is an older machine of mine where, we check it like this. Like when I raise the nitrous oxide, you will notice that the oxygen level is also simultaneously rising. If you can follow this video, you will notice that the rising nitrous oxide levels also raises the oxygen level. Now, if you're having one of these newer sedation machines, you probably will have to keep the you have to keep the oxygen control or the total air control, the total volume control knob at 0 and raise only the concentration control knob. Now, this should ensure that nothing rises. When you raise only the concentration control knob, none of these ball points you won't see any floating ball points in the flow meter. But once you start raising the flow control knob, you will notice that there will be some kind of a flow. So this ensures that your concentration control knobs are working perfectly and your flow control knobs are working perfectly. And the other thing that you'll have to remember is to ensure that your NitroLock or the nitrous oxide fail-safe systems are also working properly. Now, again, what I did is after switching on my nitrous oxide machine, I'm closing the oxygen cylinder. That is, I'm just cutting the oxygen supply to the machine and I'm coming and watching what's actually going to happen here. Now, there are different types of alarms in different machines. Like, for example, in my machine, I believe the volume is not heard for all the participants here, but actually you'll be able to hear a beep sound now, all right? And I want you to closely observe the flow meter now. By the time the oxygen level, which is to the right, O2, it reaches below 1.5 liters, you will notice that the nitrous oxide level is going to drop very fast. You saw that? It quickly drops down, which means that when the level of oxygen is below the critical limit, the nitrous oxide flow is completely locked. Now, this is what is called as it's called by different names in different places. Here we call it as the NitroLock, and somewhere else it's called as the fail-safe system. So essentially, this is something that you'll have to check every time that you use your nitrous oxide sedation apparatus. Okay. So that's about the different types of checklists as far as noise is concerned. And always have standby or additional tanks in order to ensure that you do not run out of important the sedative gases during the procedure, and make a note of the pressure gauge readings every single day. So these checklists will help you ensure that you do not just function not just face any hazard, but also function effectively on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so the next common thing that you'll have to remember if you're providing sedation, anything other than noise, all right? If you're providing even oral sedation, oral midazolam sedation, or any other type of sedation, nasal sedation, you do not try to attempt any other sedation without ensuring that you have these following items in your clinic. A very common acronym that has been used over a period of time is SOAPME, which is having the right type of suction catheters for S, ensuring that there is adequate oxygen supply. We already talked about oxygen levels when we talked about the noise device. Having the right airway equipment. Now I'm going to talk about that. Pharmacy for P, which is having the right type of drugs, life-saving drugs. M for monitors. I'm going to simplify the monitoring process for you. And then E is the equipments that may be needed for any special case. Now, coming to the drugs that you require to rescue a sedated patient. All right. Now, these are all very simple drugs that can be very, very easily sourced, just that you have to ensure that you have a checklist that will ensure that you know the expiry date for sure. Like, for example, albuterol or salmeterol for inhalation in case of any bronchospasm that you may encounter, and ammonia spirits to ensure that quickly whether if the patient can breathe through it in case of when you come across some kind of a syncope. So like that, each drug plays a very, very important role. All right, so ensure that you are having these drugs, and the checklist will help you find out if these drugs are if they've passed their expiry dates, ensure that you're replacing them right as well. Okay. The next set of equipments, whether you're providing intravenous sedation in your clinic or not, you need to have the whole armamentarium intravenous equipment. Let's say you're facing an emergency in your clinic. All right. It need not necessarily be even a sedation emergency. It could be even an emergency related to some other type of allergy or some other type of local anesthetic allergy. And even if a person who is well versed with advanced life support is there in the clinic to help you, all right, he would not be able to do anything without having these intravenous equipment or airway equipment in place. So whether you're using them or not, having a set like this in a clinic will ensure that you are well prepared to face any kind of emergency before the emergency medical services come and take care of the patient. So ensure that you're having size appropriate intravenous catheters. All right. So this holds good even if you're doing oral sedation alone. So sometimes you may ask me, I'm just doing simple oral sedation. There's nothing like simple sedation. If you're taking the patient to a moderate level of sedation with any kind of drugs, it is necessary that you have all these things. And it's not what I am trying to tell. It's exactly as per what the AAPD regulations tell. Okay. So you need to have, this is what the AAPD regulations say. So you need to have the size appropriate intravenous catheters, ensure that there is some stock of intravenous fluids, proper intravenous tubing. So if you're predominantly seeing only pediatric patients, ensure that you're having a pediatric drip set. If you're having a general practice, have both adult and pediatric drip set. Okay. And the most important set that you need to have always when you're providing some kind of a sedation service in your clinic is the airway management equipment. Most sedation emergencies are related to the airway due to respiratory depression. So you need to have these this checklist will ensure that you're having the size appropriate airway resuscitation equipment. Okay. Now, if you're looking at only a pediatric patient, the basic set that you need to have is at least a bag mask ventilation you should be able to provide. Okay. Now, let's say that you run into some kind of an emergency. Okay. And, an unfortunate event happened by virtue of which you are facing some kind of legal issues. Okay. The court will not immediately prosecute you. All right. The court will always, you will be given a chance to prove as to what you did in order to, rectify that emergency situation that you saw. So probably you'll try to explain, yes, I tried to give a bag mask ventilation. So which means you must have a bag mask, the breathing bag and valve set, and a size appropriate, the face, an age appropriate face mask as well. So having a BMV, bag mask ventilation, is a must if you're doing any kind of sedation, simple oral sedation or nasal sedation or IV, ensure that you're having BMV. The next important item that you should have is an oral airway, also called as Gudel's airway. Now, it's very, very simple. Now, just Google oral airway or oropharyngeal airways, and if you look into YouTube videos, you will find how the Gudel airways, the right size of Gudel airways are selected and how they need to be inserted. In fact, I'll be very, very happy to invite you all to a workshop that we are hosting in the month of Jan, where we are going to look at we are planning for a comprehensive sedation workshop. With even advanced life support modules that we are planning to teach for dentists. So you're most welcome here, and I will be very glad to post it to you. If you're interested, do write to me. So having an oral airway is the first step towards managing, is the first step towards managing a respiratory depression, especially after bag mask ventilation. By this time, if you notice that your oral airway, even after insertion of an oral airway, the child is not responding properly, your assistants must be trained to call for help. And you would be proceeding with the next level of management, which is using a nasal trumpet or a nasal airway, The next level being using an LMA or the laryngeal mask airway. So you just have to proceed with it step by step. There is an algorithm that how you have to manage a child the moment you see that they are apneic. Okay. Now coming to monitoring equipments, let me make it very simple for you. If you are having one of those finger type pulse oximeters, which are using very, very commonly, it's tried to, get beyond them. Just take that. Probably you can use it during the post-op monitoring, etc. But if you're providing any sedation other than noise, if you're providing oral sedation, nasal sedation, intravenous sedation, IEM, any type of sedation other than noise in your clinic, please ensure that you have a multi-para monitor. All right. I was just talking about medical legal cases and how you handle them. The first thing that the judge is going to ask you, or a medical expert in the panel is going to ask you, is did you monitor the blood pressure as and when you are giving sedation? So if you do not have a multiple para monitor, and if you're not if you're not looking at the blood pressure, if you're not looking at the oxygen saturation levels, if you're not monitoring it intensively, it would definitely mean that you have been negligent during your procedure. These multiple para monitors are available at relatively less expensive prices these days. So go ahead and get a multiple para monitor with ability to even measure end-tidal carbon dioxide. Now, you can always buy the capnograph addition even at a later stage, but when you're buying a multiple para monitor, ensure that it also has the capability to monitor carbon dioxide levels. And this is a must if you're providing sedation, anything other than noise. Okay, so far we saw about two different types of checklists. We talked about the patient selection checklist, and then we talked about the documentation checklist where we planned about informed consent. And then we also saw the third one, the equipment checklists as well, which are needed for delivery of safe sedation and which are also needed for resuscitating any patient during emergency. Now, let's go to the next part of the checklist. That is, what would you see on the day of sedation? All right, on the day of sedation, what would you have to say? Now, this is of greater importance if you're practicing abroad. You know why? Because from the day of planning to the day of doing a procedure, there's a huge gap if you are planning somewhere in the American countries or European countries, because, okay, a child is fit for sedation. Come on, let's meet you after 2 months. That's exactly what the authorities are going to say over there. But over here, probably, the moment we plan for sedation and the patient says, yes, we probably would be going with sedation within a few days itself. So, but still, this plays a very important role because sometimes negligent parents may not be taking good care of children. So you're going to understand why. So on the day of sedation, look at the first point. Very, very important. This is something which you should have covered even during the post-op instructions that you reviewed earlier itself. There should be at least 2 individuals accompanying the child. All right. If you're planning for any type of sedation, whether minimal, moderate, or deep sedation, maybe especially during moderate and deep sedation, you should ensure that there are at least 2 individuals accompanying the child. All right, so that one individual constantly is there to visually inspect the patient when the patient is being transported back to home, and while the other individual manages other activities like driving a car or doing all the other activities. So ensure that there are 2 individuals and make note of that. Okay, and then you start reviewing the other findings, like, is there a change in medical history? Did the patient start with any new medications? Okay, and one important point that you will have to remember during any kind of sedation, in fact, even during the pre-op instructions, you would have already asked the parent to inform you if the child develops any kind of fever or illness, respiratory illness. So you have to check whether the child is again having some kind of respiratory illness. If the child is having cold, severe cold, if the upper airway is not clear, if the lung is not clear, then it makes sense to postpone the procedure. It is better to avoid the procedure. Whereas newer evidence still states that mild to moderate, discharge from the nasal discharges is still not an issue. I mean, they do not cause considerable issues post-operatively. But when you're planning for deeper levels of sedation, it's always better to err on the safer side. So it's better to avoid the child if there is, if you find that the upper airway is not clear, if the lung is not clear. Review the NPO status. Now, again, this is a very important topic which has been on debate more recently. How long do you, hold the patient on fasting? I mean, how long should the child fast? Now, please ensure that, I mean, in the oral sedation instruction form that I've actually uploaded in the folder, you will find that we have only asked you to, stop clear liquids at least just about 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours before the procedure. Okay. Please do not make the mistake of starving the child of even of water for about 4 hours, 5 hours. Okay. Now that is a very, very, a grave mistake that we tend to do with, any kind of sedation. So ensure that the child is able to, have some kind of clear liquid at least until 2 hours or 1 to 2 hours before the procedure. Probably all the other foods can be stopped 4 hours before the procedure, like milk or other fried fatty foods, or all the rice and all these things can actually be stopped prior. Okay, so after you again go through your airway assessment on the day of sedation as well, now you go ahead with the safety checklist, check whether your monitors are functioning, if the monitor is battery operated, whether it is adequately charged, whether you have all the emergency kit ready. So ensure that again you are reviewing the instructions with the parent. Okay. Now, one important point, the beauty of this checklist is that if you look at the last segment, again, the checklist asks you to assess the cooperation level. Okay. Is the patient still unwilling to cooperate, or does the patient cooperate now? All right. Now, that's the beauty of this checklist, because in my experience with sedation over the last 8 to 10 years, I've noticed that sometimes, all right, we plan a sedation and all that, and on the day of sedation, some very uncooperative children begin to cooperate. Yes, it has happened to me at least 2 times in the last 10 years. And I've made it a point always that even if the child is indicated for some kind of a deep sedation, I try to talk to the patient and see if by any chance he cooperates. And if he cooperates, dear friends, please feel free to cancel the type of sedation that you're planning to offer to the patient and try to treat the patient in the normal way. All right. So that is exactly the beauty of this checklist, which will even tell you about, that is the reason why you need to, assess the cooperation level, the behavioral interaction, even on the day of, sedation. Okay. And another key place or important place where errors very frequently happen during sedation is in calculating drug dosages. Okay. Now, I know most of us took up dentistry or medicine because we hate maths, but I'll tell you what, sedation, anything other than noise, thrives on doing proper calculation of drug doses. Okay. So feel free to write the type of drug that you are going to use, whether you're going to use it orally, nasally, or intravenously. If it's oral midazolam, write it as 0.5 milligram per kg. What is the weight of the child? Multiply, calculate the total milligram that you may have to provide, and then look into the ampule. In fact, this mistake happened with one of my own anesthetists, wherein he had loaded in an urgency, he loaded the 5 mg per ml midazolam, assuming that it was 1 mg per ml. All right. So these type of mishaps or mistakes should never happen. All right. So ensure that you're noting everything here. So that will give you a clear calculation that what is the maximum amount of drug that can be given for a child. So this actually very clearly tells you, I mean, this checklist will tell you what is the maximum amount of drug that you can inject at any point of time during the course of a sedation. And that is a very key step to avoid any kind of mishap during a procedure. I'm sorry. Dr. Vignesh, am I audible? Is everything going fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. If any issues with that, I'll just unmute and let you know.
Thank you. Okay. And again, if you're using an oral midazolam, ensure that you are having flumazenil with you. Now, I know flumazenil is not a drug that is probably very easily available everywhere, but you have to take extra efforts to find out, probably through the hospitals that are there available nearby or through your anesthetist contacts. Try to somehow source flumazenil if you're using oral midazolam sedation. You never know when it can come handy. For the last 10 years, I've always only thrown the flumazenil once the expiry has got over. All right. So you may also be doing the same most of the times, and you must be happy that you've never been able to use flumazenil during your practice, but ensure that you're having one. All right. And another important point is to calculate the amount of local anesthetics. Now, I run a general practice, so whenever we do a full arch implant case or something, we ensure that we do not provide excessive amount of local anesthetic during sedation, because they will require multiple injections. Now, when it comes to children, pediatric dentistry, we usually are working a quadrant under sedation or probably a full arch, and there is very less chance that a local anesthetic overdose could result in respiratory depression or any other kind of emergency, but still would be a great thing to actually write down the weight of the child, calculate the total mg of local anesthetic that you can provide, and divide it to find out the number of cartridges, the maximum number of cartridges or the maximum number of syringes that can actually be injected for your patient. So this is the drug dosage checklist that is going to ensure that no mistakes happen because of overdose. All right. Now, this checklist is, it's not a checklist, but more of a record, is very essential when you're providing oral sedation or nasal sedation or intravenous sedation. A simple tip that I can provide you is, do not store any of these drugs in bulk. I repeat, even if you get it at half the price or a very lesser price, my dear friends, do not buy and store sedative drugs in bulk, okay? Because saving or storing sedative drugs is a huge responsibility. How do I know? Yes, I've stored sedative drugs in a hostel, and I've done a thesis involving close to 150 sedation sessions, wherein I have to break an ampule every single day, pour, and then make it more palatable for the patient and provide to the patient. All right, I know the issues associated with safeguarding your sedatives. Okay, there is great potential for misuse. Okay, you never know. One of your own assistants might steal them, or you might end up, if somebody knows that you're storing huge amount of sedatives, that could be a reason why somebody may even break into your operatory to take it away from you. So always ensure that you're having the minimum possible requirement of sedatives. All right, and especially please understand that if you are going to store opioids like fentanyl or anything, please be very, very clear that it requires special license to, to store opioids in your in any kind of operatory. So make sure you're knowledgeable about that before you store. And what I would say is that during every use of an ampule, make a note of the batch number and for which patient you're using. So in the sedation record itself, you can probably write there itself which batch number you used for which patient. Thereby, even in future, if there is any potential problem that you're facing from some kind of a bureau that wants to check, all right, then you're always on the safer side. Okay, so that's a small tip that I wanted to inform you all. And if there are postgraduate students who are listening to this, or if there are practitioners who would love to, record their sedation sessions properly in such a way that you would use the data for some kind of a publication in future, this is the way to actually record all the data, or the data that you are gathering during a sedation session. Okay, so if you look at this, it also tells you about the type of monitor that you have to use, what is the type of protective stimulation that you have adopted, and I mean the different types of sedatives that you've used at different point of time. Like if you're using intravenous sedative, at 5th minute, you probably would have injected a bolus, mentioned that. At 20th minute, probably you injected another bolus, you injected another increment, sorry, not bolus, mentioned that. And if you're using nitrous oxide oxygen, probably you would want to make a note of what was the concentration at different time intervals. So this will in turn, this data is very, very valuable. When you have about 100 or 200 patients, data of alone more than 100 patients at some point of time, you would notice that there are so much of information, so much of lessons that you can learn from looking back at your own data itself. All right, and that is something that gives you more valuable lessons than anything else, actually. So ensure that you're documenting it well, all right, with this type of a sheet. And in my clinic, the most common index that I use to monitor the sedation level, to note on the sedation level, is this. Is the patient at minimal, moderate, or deep level of sedation, and how is the behavior response to treatment? So this is noted at the last two columns that you actually see here. I'm sorry, my indicator is not working today, so I hope you are able to follow this. Okay. And coming up to the last but the most essential part of any sedation session is safe discharge of the patient. At the end of the day, you're doing sedation in order to ensure that the patients, that all your goals are met, and one of the most important goal is to ensure that the patient gets discharged safely from your operatory. Okay, so use your pulse oximeter again to check if there is good oxygen saturation, if the heart rate is fine. The patient's speech and the way the patient breathes and would help you in ensuring that the patient's airway is patent, and is the patient easily arousable, whether the child can sit unaided, whether the child's talking level has returned to the pre-sedation level. Now, ensuring that all these points are fine will ensure that you do a safe discharge for the patient, and also note down all these findings. Especially note down the temperature. I've had instances where the patients say that they develop fever from the clinic, but at least it is again a debatable point where you cannot say that the patient, just by noting down the temperature, you cannot say that the patient did not acquire a fever from the clinic. But still, it is at least a small safeguard during many procedures. So ensure that you are noting down the vital signs during discharge also. Okay, and again, when you discharge, review the post-operative instructions as seen in the second column with the parent, with the guardian, and ensure that there are two people available, and that ends a safe discharge checklist. Okay, and the checklists do not end there. All right, remember this point very well. Make sure that you have post-op calls scheduled a day later, and at least another 3 days later, at least 2 post-op calls are done for sedation patients, and talk to them and ask them about, how did the child sleep at night? Was there any other incidents of vomiting? Ensure about the well-being of the child in total. All right. And of course, the points that you note down here could be of great value for you. So that way you'll be able to find out what type of drugs are causing what type of issues with the patient. Like, you probably are using too much of ketamine. I mean, is it resulting in sleepless nights for the child? You probably, if you're using dexmedetomidine, I mean, is it ensuring that your child is able to sleep well? So you would be able to make comparisons, based on your own data as time passes, when especially from reviewing the post-op symptoms of the patients. So, to conclude, checklists provide reminders of only the most critical and important steps. Now, this may look like a huge work for you. I mean, should I actually sit and, mark all these things, write all these things, all right? But you'll have to understand that, it gives you reminders of the most important steps, all right? Checklist by itself will not do the work, all right? But it gives you reminders of the most important steps that even people who are very, very skilled can actually miss. So it was actually great talking to all of you. I mean, if you have any further doubts or anything related to sedation that you would want to ask me to, feel free to connect with me on my Instagram page or on my Facebook page. Thank you for being fantastic audience. It has been my pleasure to talk to you all.
Thank you for the lecture, sir. Sir, can we go for the participants?
Yes, you take the participants' questions. I'll come at the end.
Any question from the participants can unmute yourself and ask the question, or if anything is there, you can just post in the chat box. Any questions from PTs?
I mean, they end up sedating everybody.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
Dr. Akshaya.
So, sorry, I just have a doubt, sir.
Yeah.
So, in one of your checklists, you had mentioned about the limited neck mobility in one of the checklists. How do we assess that, sir?
That's a good question, actually. The way to assess whether the patient is having good neck mobility is to ensure that to check the range of movements, all right, the movements of neck extension and flexion, and then the left to right movements. You would notice that some syndromic patients have atlantoaxial instability, cervical instability. That would play a very, very crucial role, especially during resuscitation. All right, you need a proper extension of neck. If you're planning to place some kind of an airway to resuscitate a child, there is limited neck mobility. You're not able to flex the neck. The anesthetist would not be able to insert some kind of an airway to resuscitate the child or intubate the child. So the simple check is to ensure that the child is able to move, do flexion and extension properly, and right and left movements.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from participants?
I think Dr. Vignesh, I think
That's no question.
actually it's very clear. So actually, Dr. Batnam, you haven't sedated any of us. In fact, you made it very clear. So that's the reason I guess there are no questions. And I really enjoy every presentation of yours, and there's always so much to take home. And definitely the points, I think those who have not looked into nitrous or something to check the fail-safe mechanisms and simple, very simple things, practically useful things. Those are important in the presentations, which are the take-home points. And so let us know the Coimbatore sedation workshop. We pass it on, and I'll see whether my residents and scholars, if they want to look at it, and probably we might. That's a great thing. And also, I will second, if anybody have not read that book, Atal Gawande's Checklist Manifesto. So I would suggest that you probably this is time to buy that book and read. It's an amazing masterpiece. He's a surgeon from the US, so many books are there. I think this is one of the best you can look at, and definitely for an experienced clinician also to have a checklist. It's one of the best way to evaluate and get ready and keep everything ready. Even in research, we have a lot of checklists which are very useful. Having said that, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and looking forward to hear you more often whenever there is an opportunity. And Dr. Vignesh.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you for a wonderful lecture. It's clear and crystal regarding the checklist which you had published, and I hope it will come in the third edition of Sir's textbook in the April to June 2022. So we are more eager to learn about it. Personally, I had done only 1 or 2, maximum 3 to 4 cases in the sedation. So I had to learn more about it, and then we have to start the sedations part. And a kind request to all the participants, I posted the feedback form link in the chat box. So please fill it up and then claim the certificate for participation. And so before sharing the certificate of appreciation, I just want to share the next program's invitation. That's the Chat with Champion Buddies lecture series 28 to breathe through life, holistic approach for pediatric.
Not visible, Vignesh.
So sorry, sir. 1 second, sir. Just press. Sir, now it's visible, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, sir. And so next program is lecture series 28 to breathe through life, a holistic approach for pediatric dentistry by Dr. Joby Peter, sir. Scheduled on 15th December. So please kindly mark your calendars. 15th December, 2 to 3 p.m. And also, just want to share the certificate of appreciation to our speakers, Dr. Padmanabhan, sir. Sir, I'll send the hard copy within 2 weeks, sir. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. And if any guidelines or if any protocols is there, you can just share with the mail so that we can share with our PGs and faculties teams.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dr. Vignesh. Thanks for all the efforts that you've taken. Thank you very much, sir. It's a great privilege and honor to be a part of a program that you conduct. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all the participants as well.
Yes. If any questions is there, I'll mail you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, participants. Thanks for being wonderful audience. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Have a good day, sir. Thank you all.